I declare the ordinary council meeting of the 28th of June 2022 held in council chambers at the City of Subiaco open at 5:32 p.m. Welcome councillors, staff, the media and members of the community. On behalf of the City of Subiaco, I acknowledge the Whadjuk Noongar people as the traditional custodians of the area. We recognise their cultural connection to the land and waterways of Subiaco and their continuing contribution to our city. We pay respect to their elders past, present and emerging and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Please note that this meeting is being live streamed and recorded. By being present at this meeting, members of the public consent to the possibility that their image and voice may be live streamed to the public. Tonight, as per other recent meetings, we're going to be in hybrid mode, meaning that we'll have a combination of in-person and electronic attendances by both councillors and staff. Okay, it looks like there'll be no apologies this evening as everyone's accounted for. And leave of absence, I understand, Councillor Powell, you've got an application to submit.
Yes, I have, and through you, Mayor, an application for the 12th to the 16th of September, inclusive, to attend a transport seminar. Thank you.
Can I have a mover and a seconder for the leave application? Councillor Hammersley and Councillor Kosovich. All those in favour? Councillor Stroud, I think you would have voted for that. Yep, okay, I think that's unanimous. Disclosure of interest. Councillor Hammersley, I understand you've got one.
Yes, thank you. I, Angela Hammersley, wish to declare an interest in item C3 for tonight's meeting. Type of interest I wish to declare is financial, pursuant to section 5.6A of the Local Government Act 1995. The nature of my interest is, together with my husband, I own 29 Gloucester Street, Subiaco, which has been recommended for inclusion in the West Subiaco Precinct Local Heritage Survey. Thank you.
Thank you, and there's been no other declarations submitted. Okay, Councillor De Vries.
I, Rosemary De Vries, wish to declare an interest in the following item to be considered by Council at its meeting held on the 28th of June 2022, agenda item C4, impartiality pursuant to clause 22.2. I know the nature of my interest is I know one of the nominees for the DAEC and consider him to be a friend. This will have no impact on how I select nominees for the DAEC.
Thank you. Okay, there were no previous public questions taken on notice. That brings us to public question time, starting with Peter Skender of Coglan Road, Subiaco.
Good evening. Thank you, Mayor, councillors, staff and public. Thank you for taking my question. I, Peter Skender, represent the Owners Corporation of 6466 Coglan Road, Subiaco. On the following dates, the 23rd of March 2010, 24th of June 2021, the 12th of December 2011 and the 9th of July 2021, there were significant rainfall events of flooding at the rear of our properties. Council stormwater pits overflowed and caused damage, nuisance and disrupted our businesses. Now I understand that before the council there is a capital works schedule that is designed to address some of these problems, in particular the property I'm speaking about. My question to the council is, in the event that tonight's meeting does not approve the capital works for the properties, and in particular the property in question, what measures will the council take in the future to stop or prevent further nuisance, water ingress, flood damage and disruption to our businesses? Thank you.
Thank you. Given that there's an officer recommendation that supports a schedule of works, this may become moot, but I'll go to the Acting Director of Technical Services to advise on what would happen if the schedule of works is not carried.
Thank you for your question, Peter. So the city has been undertaking minor works such as installing bunds to prevent water crossing into private properties until more permanent works can be completed when funding is allocated in the capital works budget. The city will continue with these initiatives in cooperation with the impacted properties until appropriate capital works can be done.
The next, that's all the public questions, so that brings us to public statement time. We've had a single statement submitted by Helen Leader of Cuthbert Street, Shenton Park.
Thank you, and I forgot to say that this relates to the FOGO item. And my thanks to all concerned for a most informative Q&A session last week. If possible, I hope that my takeaway assumptions from that session can be confirmed. As I have too many questions to submit a question, I guess I'm hoping to be granted a discretion, allowing a staff response, but I'm not expecting it. 1. The implementation of FOGO will be compulsory from 2025, unlike Furge Valley, which a year ago the previous council voted 9-3 for an 18-month trial. 2. If those statements are correct, then FOGO can't be presumed to be able to piggyback on Furge Valley until after the trial has completed and gone through community feedback and gone back to council, say by April 2023, when the council may decide to revert to the popular biannual Verge chuckouts. 3. Staff stated that at present about 13% of households don't use the green waste collection. Regardless, those 13%, many of whom will live in apartments, will be obliged to take delivery of a 240-litre green FOGO bin for weekly collection of food scraps, regardless of whether or not they have room for it. 4. This may well necessitate developers needing to have another look at plans, i.e., has one Subiaco allowed space for 237 additional 240-litre bins? And if not, will the developer be given relevant discretions to allow most of the bins to be quietly returned? 5. Now, thinking now of the 87% of households that do use the green waste service, regardless of whether or not they have room for the additional bin, a proportion of these will enjoy the shade and significant debris from the city's significant trees. As I live on a corner, I frequently drag fallen branches, which are clearly the council's property, from 2 streets and leave them on my verge. Likewise, at various times of the year, I bag more council property, fallen leaves, gum nuts, bark and smaller branches, from both my property as well as from the footpaths and verges. Given that the amount would be too much for the proposed bin, even if it wasn't already full of my own pruning, should I now desist from any attempt to clear the streets and footpaths of significant debris? And sorry, given that I won't be the only resident with this problem, does the city have a plan to deal with the ever-increasing significant waste from the city's flourishing significant trees? Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Leader. We won't take those as questions as such, and usually we wouldn't comment on public statements, but the Acting Director has provided Council some written comments. So, Acting Director, I'm happy for you to say as much or as little about those comments for the public as you'd like.
Thank you, Mayor. So in response to your questions, the city is required to provide a FOGO service by 2025. However, residents who live in multi-unit developments or apartment complexes will not be expected to have a 240-litre bin, as many of these units will be on a shared service and bins will be stored in bin stores for these complexes. New developments within the city are required to ensure they future-proof their bin stores and make allocations for FOGO. Developments such as One Subiaco would have a shared service, meaning they would not require 240-litre bin for each apartment. In response to Verge Valley, this will be reviewed at the end of the trial period and a report to Council will be presented in March 2023. In regards to the street tree debris and leaf litter, the city sweeps The city sweeps all streets on a fortnightly rotation. In areas the leaf drop is excessive, additional sweeping is provided. For those large branches and debris from street trees, a request can be sent to the city, and this will be collected by the city's Arbor team. And then finally, just the staff have provided information to elected members around options for collection of bulk green waste in addition to the FOGO service.
Okay, that's the end of public statement time, and there were no petitions or approved deputations submitted ahead of the meeting. So that would now bring us to confirmation of minutes of previous meetings. First up, the ordinary council meeting of the 31st of May 2022. Do I have a mover and a seconder to accept those minutes? Councillor Stroud and Councillor White. All those in favour? It's carried unanimously. We've also got the minutes of the special council meeting of 7 June 2022. A mover and a seconder to accept those minutes, please. I think that was Councillor Stroud and Councillor White again. All those in favour? Carried unanimously. Okay, a quick announcement from myself as presiding member. I'd just like to announce or observe that there are some good things happening in Subiaco, and I'd like to draw your attention to the urban beer crawl, which happened a few Saturdays ago. The information I've got from staff is that there were several hundred tickets sold out in record time, and the format was quite simple. It involved arriving at a pub at a designated time of day, collecting a wristband, and visiting a number of pubs around Subiaco to sample the tasting trays of craft beers. The local businesses that participated included Refuge Small Bar, Bark Subiaco, Fenway Subiaco, Bar Loiter, Golden West Brewing Co., the Subiaco Hotel and the Village Bar. From my own personal experience and from my observations of others on the day, I think it was a very successful event that highlighted some local Subiaco businesses as well as the suburb in general. And I had to smile at one point when one of the punters next to me, making conversation to myself, and I was incognito at the time wearing a baseball cap and a hoodie, she remarked that it was great to see people coming back to Subiaco, and I think that's a proposition with which we could all wholeheartedly agree. The Urban Beer Crawl is part of a partner package between Subiaco and the Neighbourhood Events Co. So there's a series of events coming up in 2022, which would be in addition to some of the other events that are more prominently branded City of Subiaco. So there'll be a wine and dine tour, an urban cocktail trail, and an urban wine walk in the remainder of the year. And those events, as I mentioned, are a partnership between Subiaco and the Neighbourhood Events Co. So that was the only announcement. There's plenty more happening, but I think for now we'd best be getting on to the agenda for tonight's meeting. So we'll get straight into the reports of committees and officers, beginning with a possible en-bloc vote. Now at the moment I've got a possible en-bloc item consisting of items P1, P3, C1, C2, C3, C7, Okay, just to confirm, the possible en bloc motion will consist of P1, P3, C1, C2, C6, C7 and C8, with the remainder of the officer reports pulled because there's either been a disclosure of interest or an amendment or alternative submitted. Councillor Hamsley.
I think you mentioned C3, but that's the one that
I did it first, but that's out now. That C3 is not part of the en bloc item. Councillor Stroud.
I'd like to withdraw C6, thank you.
Are there any other items to be withdrawn from the en bloc motion? Councillor Hammersley.
If it's still in there, I'd like to pull C7.
Okay, we're left with P1, P3, C1, C2 and C8. If there's no other items to be withdrawn, I'll ask for a mover and a seconder for the en bloc vote. Councillor Stroud and Councillor Kosovich. All those in favour? Okay, that's carried unanimously. So what that means for people viewing the meeting is that the items comprising the en bloc vote have been carried without debate because there weren't any alternatives or any declarations made in relation to those items, so we've carried those unanimously and without debate. Okay, we'll move on to item P1, the investment policy. Do I have a mover and a seconder for the officer recommendation? Okay, P2, lease extensions. A mover and a seconder for the officer recommendation, please. Councillor Stroud and Councillor Jennings. Councillor Stroud, did you wish to speak?
Thank you. Just very briefly, this has already gone through PX, so it's a recommendation up from our Property and Assets Committee. It's really just about the CEO executing a deed of lease on the extension options, and also I accept the. I'm personally happy to accept the amendment put up by Councillor Hammersley, which helps just further clarity to the amendment. Thank you. Sorry, further clarity to the office recommendation.
Councillor Jennings, did you wish to speak?
Yes, thank you, Mayor, unaccustomed as I am. Very briefly, I support Councillor Stroud's comments, and it's an innocuous but useful item so staff. It cuts down sort of a bureaucratic things that would normally go through council, and yes, and Councillor Hammersley's amendment too, just to foreshadow that I think that that's just a good amendment as it clarifies the intent. Thanks.
Councillor Jennings, do you agree with Councillor Hammersley's amendment? Okay, so the mover and the seconder of the item are agreeable to the amendment, so we can take it as amended, and we'll continue the debate having regard to the officer recommendation as amended by the amendment which Councillor Hammersley submitted. So are there any speakers against the amended recommendation? Any final speakers for? Councillor Stroud, do you wish to close? Okay, we'll call the vote. All those in favour? That one's carried unanimously. Okay, the next item is C3. You'd recall that was pulled from the en bloc because a financial interest has been declared and Councillor Hammersley's just left the chamber. So I'll be looking for a mover and a seconder, C3, relating to the draft West Subiaco Precinct Local Heritage Survey. Councillor Kosovich. Councillor Stroud. Councillor Kosovich, did you wish to speak? Councillor Stroud, did you wish to speak?
I'll reserve my right, thank you.
Any speakers for or against item C3? Okay, well, there's nothing to close on, Councillor Kosovich. You could say a few words if you like, but otherwise I'll call the vote. Okay, all those in favour of C3? That is carried 8-0. If someone could let Councillor Hammersley know. Councillors, we'll probably just leave item C4 to the end because we may need to discuss nominees to the Disability Access and Inclusion Committee, so people's personal affairs might need to be discussed, so we'll do that behind closed doors. So next we'll deal with item C5, the proposed implementation of food organics, garden organics waste service. Councillor Stroud, you're wanting to move the item, and Councillor Hammersley seconding. Okay, and I note we've got an amendment from Councillor Powell. Councillor Stroud.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mayor. I will try and put this quite succinctly. We have had, behind the scenes, we've asked a lot of appropriately, the elected members have asked a lot of questions. We had a robust briefing forum, as recognised by a statement tonight. What this is really about is a recommendation to bring in FOGO. We won't be the first to do this. It is a compulsory requirement from the war strategy. What it means is a third bin for our food and our green waste. And this will be processed to compost. I want to repeat that. It will be processed to compost. That means that instead of going into a red bin, which goes off to landfill, it's going to be a far more efficient use of that material by it being compost. It's going in the opposite direction to the landfill. For those who, now how much residents choose to put in this bin is really up to their choice. If they're already composting in their garden, that's terrific. But what we're asking is, if you've got any food scraps and any green scraps, green waste, please put it in to this third bin. This is not really a dramatic change for Subiaco residents because we used to have 3 bins. Now, why is this a better system? As I said, because it's a proven, efficient way of composting the green waste and the food scraps. This is high-grade compost, the result of this. It will be the stuff that you'll buy from Bunnings and gardening centres. It also means it's a reduction in landfill. Landfill is the most expensive way of getting rid of our waste. It's like a big no-no, avoid at all costs. So what will it cost? It's going to be at least a 3.5% increase to our waste levy, a levy that was going to be increased anyway because of inflation and haulage costs. And when does it start? The next financial year. In actual fact, not until the rollout of the bins is not actually until the fourth quarter of our financial year. What will it involve? A lot of education and marketing by the city, a lot of patience and understanding from our community, and most importantly, their commitment, because this is all about managing our waste wisely. It's about the circle economy. And this is also aligned, as I said, we're not the first. Neighbours in Cottesloe, neighbours such as Cottesloe and Vincent are already doing it. Cambridge is about to do it. And the other member councils at WMRC will follow in due course. It's aligned FOGO. The FOGO service is aligned with our city waste plan, the Australian standards for waste and recycling, and it's also aligned with the state waste avoidance and resource recovery strategy. I thank staff for their patience and their very detailed responses to all our probing questions, and I recommend this recommendation to you. Thank you, Mayor.
Councillor Hammersley.
Thank you, yes. I am in favour of proceeding with FOGO now because it does have to be done. We're actually not that far off the deadline in terms of actually the logistics of getting it done. As Councillor Stroud has just pointed out, it's a big job and it won't practically be achieved until the end of the next financial year. So what we're doing here is taking advantage of moving slightly before the end of the deadline. Although it's a modest grant from the state to assist with the cost, I think it's $12 a household. The $12 adds up to $60,000, which is a small contribution to the cost of doing this, but at least it's something. My understanding is that assistance will evaporate if we don't get moving and achieve this before the deadline. There is a cost to doing FOGO, and that is because the processing fees to take all our organic waste into the composting system is higher than if we were just dealing with green waste, just dealing with green waste. That is because we'll be putting all sorts of things that we can't compost, like bones and other items. And what I would say is that on the studying that I've done, the cost is higher, but the outcome is very superior in environmental terms. So it was put to me by one of my fellow elected members that this is a big change, and I at first mentally rejected that, but then the more I thought about it, it is actually a big change for our community, and I've seen all the elected members working very hard behind the scenes to grapple with that reality. And Councillor Powell has put up an amendment as a consequence. So my initial reaction was I thought the staff recommendation was the right one. The cost of dealing with garden waste, it was a question of user pays or community all chips in. And at first I was perhaps more attracted to the idea that we would just let people use the boot of their car to take clippings down to the depot, which they can do now and will be able to do once this change occurs. Now, not everybody's got a car and not everybody can actually haul stuff. So taking into account that this is a big change, I think I am leaning towards supporting the amendment. I know we're not debating the amendment yet, but I just thought I'd foreshadow that because this will just be for this first financial year, and I think we can look at how it unfolds in that first year when it's introduced. It'll probably be a slightly different council by the time it comes back for review, but when the budget comes to be done for the next year, we'll have some idea of the logistical issues that our community members face, like those that were foreshadowed by our statement giver tonight. We will see how many people actually use the bulk pickup, and whether it's economic to keep doing it, and we can make adjustments. I think this is a flexible way to do it. So, as I said, I was very close to just going with the staff recommendation, but I think for this first year it would be good to have a bit of a hybrid going. So that's where I'm at, and yes, I'm very much hoping that we can get FOGO going. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. It's probably appropriate that we consider this in a holistic manner by testing Councillor Powell's amendment at this point. That amendment being the one that was submitted earlier in the week, and it proposes 2 free Verge collections, which would occur alongside the new FOGO service. So, Councillor Powell, we'll have you move your amendment, and I'll be looking for a seconder for the amendment. Councillor Kosovich. Councillor Powell.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Mayor. I'll speak to the amendment then, if I can. Look, as has been mentioned, FOGO is mandated by the state government, so we don't really have any choice. However, this new system, I think, has a significant gap to the one it displaces, and that's what this amendment is aimed at addressing. And that gap is the loss of loose green verge collections. Now, that's part of what's been a long-established and highly valuable garden organic scheme in the city. The verge collection of loose greens is for things like prunings, you know, things that won't eat but will not easily fit into a FOGO bin. And as some of residents have been saying to me, what happens when a big branch falls on their property? How do they actually remove it? So potentially that's a disincentive for residents to keep large trees on their properties, especially if there's no way to get rid of the prunings. And I don't think that's a good outcome, because the city has got an established and accurate reputation as a leafy green suburb. We have a lovely array of city parks and gardens, a respected urban canopy policy for the public realm, but much of the greenery is in fact on private land. And this plays a significant part in the amenity of the city. Just this afternoon I received a real estate notice in the letterbox talking about how much land values had gone up in Subiaco. What was one of the key reasons? Because it's a leafy green suburb. So it's that brings people to live here. And it's not just about the foliage or the shade in summer or cooling against climate change. It's the biodiversity it brings. It's about the birds. It's about the sounds of all sorts of creatures. It's even about the scent you get from frangipani or roses when you walk down the street. It's about a healthy inner city environment from which we all benefit. As to cost, well, FOGO, it's been established, will add about 3.5% to the charges. This amendment would add about another 3%. One loose verge collection would add about $10 to the bill. 2, I've been informed, will add less than $20. But really, I don't think one verge collection will fill the gap. It will need 2, or comparatively, the price of about 4 cups of coffee spread over a year by those who are using the FOGO. So look, pardon the pun, but sometimes pruning of services can be taken too far and can be counterproductive. I believe that this is one of those cases. The forests are the lungs of the world, and the gardens are the lungs of Subiaco. They need to be kept healthy for a healthy community. And if we want Subiaco to be green and leafy, we need to afford the support to gardeners with removal of their tree pruning. So I commend this amendment to fellow councillors. Thank you.
Councillor Kosovich, did you wish to speak to the amendment? No. Does anyone want to speak against the amendment? Okay, it probably doesn't seem necessary, but Councillor De Vries, go ahead and speak for the amendment.
actually want to support it because of a slightly different reason, but I include all those wonderful leafy green reasons as well, because I live in the wonderful garden suburb of Daglish, which is quite famous for its beautiful parks and trees, and I do think that we want to encourage people to keep the trees, and I think this will be a way to ensure that people feel confident that they can regularly get rid of the excess branches and so on. So I think that it's a great initiative to have those 2 green waste pickups a year, and we may revisit that next year with something else, but I think something along these lines would continue. But in addition to that, I didn't really want the community to lose further amenity and opportunity to dispose of bulk waste through using one of the Verge Valet pickups for this purpose if it came about that they needed to do so. So I think it's another opportunity for Verge Valet to be trialled until the end of the trial, and then the community can give their feedback on that for the reasons that it was introduced, and keeping those 2 things separate would be quite important to give it a fair shot. So yeah, definitely agree, and I have nothing more to add to that, so thank you to Councillor Powell for that.
Okay, councillors, a final chance to speak to the amendment. Otherwise, I'll call the vote on the amendment. Okay, all those in favour? The amendment's carried unanimously. So what we've now got is an officer recommendation for the implementation of FOGO, and along with that, the city would provide 2 free verge collections of piles of loose greens per year as per the amendment. So we've heard from the mover and the seconder of the substantive motion. Does anyone want to speak against it? Any other speakers for? Councillor Jennings.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I'm in favour of FOGO, and I just wanted to address, the concern maybe about going to the combined waste for food and garden organics, and the capacity, I suppose, the sufficiency of that in turn, and substituting that for the current bag system, which for those kind of smaller items of green waste, leaves, etc., not such the big branches, you can have 10 bags a week. But depending on how big your family is, I guess, and how much food organics waste you have, those 2 collections of 2 40-litre bins, so that's 1 a week, that's the proposal. That takes up quite a lot, or provides quite a big capacity for leaves and that kind of loose debris. And my personal anecdote is not necessarily relevant because everyone's got a different situation, but I currently live somewhere where we've got a green bin for 2 40-litre bin for that kind of waste, and mine's collected fortnightly, and we have actually paid for an extra bin because we live on a very big block and we have lots of trees and lots of leaves constantly falling, and that is except for very rare occasions, say just when autumn, we've been through autumn and we've had more leaves than normal, but normally that's well and truly sufficient for just the normal block size and leaves. So I'm just trying to alleviate any community concerns that the change will result in not having enough capacity in this, in the standard service that you're providing. It may be the case for some people, but for most people, it should, in my own experience, it should be sufficient. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Any other speakers? Councillor Stroud, was that no, you don't wish to close? Great, okay, I'll call the vote. All those in favour? It's carried unanimously. Okay, the last item that we're going to debate in open session is C6, the new drainage improvement plan, and we've got a gentleman who's been very patiently waiting to see the debate, so let's get into it. Councillor Stroud, you'll move. Councillor Hammersley seconding. Councillor Stroud.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I asked this to come off en bloc because this is really significant. It's if we go ahead with this, and I will be asking for your support of the staff recommendation, it's really a multi-million-dollar endorsement of a drainage system to cater for 1 in 100 year type storms. So, what it's about, the recommendation is to endorse the highest level of drainage service and the greatest mitigation against flooding of properties. We're going to prepare for drainage to cater for 1 in 100 year storms. Now that is really very significant. That's not to say that we haven't in the meantime been working on our drainage system. Since last year, the city identified 59 locations experiencing varying degrees of flooding. All locations have been investigated. We've already had 8 upgrades. We've had 17 sites identified for a future upgrade. That will be at a cost of over $2 million. And in addition to that, there are 19 remain unfunded. And that's going to be an additional cost of $1.53 million to upgrade. Quite happy if staff correct me on this if I haven't got the numbers right, but I think that's how I read the report. Now the plan is to expedite this work. We could put it out over many financial years, but the plan is to bring it forward and to use our surplus funds. And am I right in understanding, and some loans? I'll just stop there with that question. Thank you, through you, Mayor. Perhaps if the CEO or the Acting Director could just explain the funding. Thank you.
Yeah, if I could, through the Chair. Now, the intention would be each year, at the end of each financial year, quite often there is a surplus, and then we would bring that back to Council as part of the budget review to actually recharge the reserve that we could therefore expedite this. So at this junction, or this point in time, we believe that process would be sufficient for us to be able to charge the reserve to the amount that we require to be able to deliver on this, so that we wouldn't be required to loan any funds. If we felt that was the case, then we would bring that back to Council, but at this point in time we're confident we'd be able to manage that process without a loan.
And the next question is, how many financial years will it take to cover this sort of cost? Understanding that already some of this is already in our budget, isn't it? So what is it to cater for the 1.53 million amount? Thank you.
So the intention is to try and move as quickly as we can on this, and so the first time we'll have a greater understanding of the extent of the surplus, etc., will be around September, October of this year, and then we'll report back through the budget review. But yes, there is reserves in place to cover for drainage, so we just balance that out to try and achieve the best way in terms of delivering this if Council resolve to proceed. So, but we're confident that we'd be able to manage that. And the reason the staff recommendation is to get the size of the work to be able to mean that the tender is substantial and manage those projects accordingly.
Can I also ask, in respect to the statement or the question tonight from Mr. Skender, is he part of the 17 sites that have already been identified for upgrade, or the 19 that are yet to be funded? Is that something you can respond to if we talk about Coghlan Road generally, perhaps? Thank you.
Thank you for your presiding member. That is correct. The site that Mr. Skender has referred to is indeed on the work schedule and is on the first year of works that we're proposing. So it's scheduled for next financial year, and in fact we've actually even met him quite recently to go through the process that we're looking to embark upon should Council resolve to approve this work schedule.
Thank you, staff. So to sum up, this is a really important initiative by the city. We are recognising, very visually, it was obvious in our streets, the flooding that was occurring from this increasing severity of storms. We've also received a number of emails from residents who have been suffering the flooding. So importantly, we are getting on and doing something about it. And the budget isn't a topic tonight, it's coming. And I can promise you that we are doing this in a very prudent way without a dramatic increase in our rates. I'll say no more, but I believe it's a very impressive result from the city, and I commend this recommendation to you. Thank you.
Councillor Hammersley.
I will just briefly. Thanks to Councillor Stroud for bringing this out. I think it would have probably, based on my observations of the hard work that's been done in workshops on this topic, and the attitude of people to the plight of those who are suffering flooding, I thought this would go through en bloc and not be controversial. But I think Councillor Stroud's on the right track in just bringing it out to acknowledge the amount of work that the city administration has done and how responsive they've been to the flooding events that we've recently suffered. And also recognising that we had a lot of options as to how far we would go in order to try and protect those in our community who are really bearing the brunt of the change that we all cause and through the way that we live on this planet. So I think it is worth recognising we've already actually invested a lot of money in the investigations, and very professional work has been done to understand the hydrology and what's needed. Now, of course, we are going to the highest level with the 1 in 100, I think. Is that right? And, of course, that's not going to guarantee anyone that there will never be a flood. Very strange things can happen, and we're seeing that very strange things do happen in terms of the amount of water that can fall out of the sky in very short periods of time. However, what we are doing is investing in something that will give us the best chance of protecting people. Now, it has been a high priority for this council to work on this, and we are working on the budget, and it's a high priority in the work that we're still doing on the budget. But this is a first step towards getting this project going, and I definitely support it. Thank you.
Any speakers against the item? Any speakers for? Councillor Kosovich.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. I'd like to endorse both the previous speakers. I think this is a no-brainer. I think we were all shocked by the floods of last July, and some people in their homes in Subiaco have been flooded more than once. I understand there's a property in the lower end of Gloucester Street, and I do not want to see those people go through flooding again. The mitigation steps that we are taking are excellent, and I commend staff for the excellent work that's gone in to date, and I strongly endorse the officer report.
Any other speakers to the item? Councillor Stroud, did you wish to close? Okay, I'll call the vote. All those in favour? It's carried unanimously. Thanks, everyone. Okay, there were no elected members' motions of which previous notice was given. Are And there's no business of an urgent nature that we need to deal with tonight. So what I'll now do is call for a procedural motion to close the meeting to the public so that we can deal with C4 and C7. And the reasons would be that for C4, we'll be discussing the personal affairs of individuals, and C7 will be discussing legal advice pertaining to the authorised inquiry into the City of Subiaco. So I'll move into seconder, please, to close the meeting. Councillor Kosovich and Councillor Powell. All those in favour? Okay, the procedural motion's carried unanimously. Thank you, media. Okay, council's voted to come out from behind closed doors, having made two decisions. On item C4, council has resolved that the following community members are appointed to the City of Subiaco Disability Access and Inclusion Committee from the 28th of June 2022 to the 21st of October 2023. Russell Jones, Rebecca Henderson, Joseph Salt, Mark Elsing, Nerida Crocker, Charisse Larche, Louise Watson and David Vosnikos. On item C7, council has resolved to endorse the completion of the independent governance review as agreed with the Department of Sport and Cultural Industries, and further resolve that the Chief Executive Officer is to provide a copy of this report and supporting documentation as listed in Attachment 1 to the Director General of the Department of Local Government, Sport and Cultural Industries. Okay, there's no further business, so I declare the City of Subiaco Ordinary Council meeting of the 28th of June 2022 closed at 7:09 p.m. Thank you, councillors, and thank you, staff.